In the year 1756, the East India Company had established a trading fort in the Indian city of Calcutta. The fort was erected to protect the harbor from locals and the pesky French who were keen on elbowing their way in on British trade interests in the region. Unfortunately, the construction of the fort upset local Bengali leaders who saw it as an affront to their sovereignty and rule over the area. Mustering an army of roughly 50,000 soldiers, the Nawab of Bengal, Siraj-ud-Daulah, marched on Calcutta with the intent of snuffing out the foreign fortress. Without proper military support, the East India Company abandoned the fort and left behind a token garrison made up of civilian officials and mostly local mercenary troops. The number left behind was no more than 150, while the rest of the East India officials fled onto their trade ships that were floating safely in the harbor. The Black Hole. At first glance, the Black Hole was not a very remarkable thing. It was a small dungeon measuring roughly 14 by 18 feet. It was a single room built for the purpose of holding a few malcontents and troublemakers at a time. It was not a full-fledged prison. The dungeon held only a single door and 2 small windows. The room was not meant to hold people for long periods of time. It was essentially the equivalent of a stockade made for a single or pair of individuals to sit in the oppressive heat for a small time before being released or transferred. That is what makes the events of June 20, 1756 so horrifying. The Black Hole claims dozens of lives. After Siraj-ud-Daulah captured Calcutta, he had the token British garrison rounded up. An eyewitness put the number at 146 people that had been taken by the Bengali forces. In an act of cruelty, the Nawab ordered all 146 prisoners to be stuffed into the Black Hole for the night. The Black Hole was roughly the size of a standard U.S. bedroom today, and it was now being forced to hold nearly 150 people. They were stuffed in one on top of another. The average temperature in Calcutta in June is 94 degrees Fahrenheit, and some people put the temperature that day at around 40 degrees Celsius, which is over 100 F. One of the people stuffed into the Black Hole that day was a Briton by the name of Holwell. He wrote a letter detailing the awful ordeal. He wrote in part, "Efforts were again made to force the door, but in vain. Many insults were used to the guard, to provoke them to fire in upon us, which, as I learned afterwards, were carried to much greater lengths when I was no more sensible of what had transacted. For my own part, one hitherto felt little pain or uneasiness, but what resulted from my anxiety for the sufferings of those within. By keeping my face between 2 of the bars, I was excessive and thirst commencing. At this period, so strong a ruinous volatile effluvia came from the prison that I was not able to turn my head that way, for more than a few seconds of time." J.Z. Holwell. Conditions were so bad they wanted the guards to open fire on them to try and force them to open the doors. Holwell only survived, presumably, because he had his face pressed against the bars and was able to breathe the fresh outside air. According to Holwell, only 23 of the 146 people forced into the Black Hole survived the ordeal. The morning after, some historians have trimmed the numbers of dead down to 43 dead out of 64 imprisoned. Either way, the next morning when the Bengali forces opened the doors of the Black Hole, there were dozens of dead piled inside. The heat, lack of fresh air and water would go on to kill all of those who did not have an advantageous position near the door and windows. The survivors were allegedly offered cool water and a chair after their ordeal before being released. Legacy and aftermath. The event would go on to shock the British public, who would later read Holwell's account of the tragedy. When British officials in India discovered the mistreatment of their men, they launched a retaliatory campaign against the Bengali in Calcutta. They recaptured the city in January of 1757 and would go on to execute the Nawab who had done the deed. The Black Hole was retired as a prison after the ordeal and was converted to a storage room instead. Today, The site still exists in Calcutta, though the old room is one, leaving only the foundation behind. This article is shared from media sources to enrich public dialogue and encourage thoughtful discussion.